So, for all throughout the year, week by week, we read a different section of the Torah. We talk about that as the Torah portion. In Hebrew, that's the parasha. And the parasha this week is called Tazria. This is every bat mitzvah's dream, is to get Tazria. Now, the students here, our benot mitzvah, those two young women who are becoming bat mitzvah this Shabbat, they and their families are laughing a little bit, that you might have noticed, because in Tazria, it's all about focusing on tzara'at. Tzara'at has often been translated as leprosy. It's this skin affliction. It kind of is the explanation why there are so many Jewish dermatologists. The whole section is talking about what do you do when you see this scaly affection, infection, leprosy kind of thing. Now, it's not really leprosy. Medical historians have said that it's not really leprosy. We don't know what it is. It could be a dermatitis, it could be a psoriasis. We don't know what it is, but whatever it is isn't particularly fun for kids becoming benot mitzvah. Because how do I find a text, a truth, in this very ancient kind of sense of things when a high priest, and we don't have priests that are employed in the Jewish community anymore, right? A Kohen is the priest, and the priest is an intermediary. And when the temple was destroyed, all of the Kohanim have been out of work. We know that there are still Kohanim amongst us, but they don't have any particular major function, only in a few symbolic ways. When the temple was destroyed and there was no more sacrifices, well, the priests had nothing else to do. But the text says very clearly that it's the priest that's going to do this examination and see how this person is going to be. Is it going to be okay that they can stay within the community, or do they need some period of time in isolation? The goal is certainly to bring them back. It's not just to cast them out, but there is a time when tzara'at is going to be a problem, that the people are going to be removed with tzara'at. Those people are going to be removed from the community. So that's what the Torah portion is largely about. And the kids are going to look at me saying, "Rabbi, please give me another date." And that's kind of what happens. But my hope is that we can always look at this ancient text and find a source of inspiration. Try and figure out how do we get to grow from it. And when I look at a particular point, not very far into this particular Torah portion, we see, as I said before in passing, the priest, the Kohen, is going to examine the affection on the skin. Now the Hebrew says, V'ra'a Kohen et hanega. V'ra'a, the priest is going to ro'eh, is going to look at. Now the translations all say examine, but it's really just to look at. It's to see. The priest has to look at another person with a nega. Now the nega often is going to be translated in kind of a high way as affection. Not the affection that when we hug each other. It's when there's some kind of a wound. So we break it down into more simple translated terms. The priest is going to look at the wound. Well, I find that to be kind of powerful today, because we look past people with wounds. We just say, go someplace else, urgent care. But I'm not going to be connected to a person with a wound. And it doesn't have to be a physical wound. We know that there are so many other kinds of wounds. It's not really about an examination for us. The word is simply ra'ah, to see, from lirot. The context is clear from the text. The priest does need to examine the person with this tzara'at, but I want to see it differently. The priest shall see, really see his wound. The priest, the one who's a leader and yet an ordinary human being, is going to see where this person hurts. You heard of the parable, I'm sure, where one friend asks another friend, let's get that. You heard the parable when one friend asks another friend, "Do you love me?" And the other friend is going to say, "Of course I love you." And then the first person, of course, is going to say, "Do you know what hurts me?" And then that second friend is going to say, how should I know? Well, then how can you really love me if you don't know what hurts me? The priest is looking at the wound. How can we just look past people? Now, I learned something that I can't really get out of my head, and I'm going to share it with you. And it's going to sound silly, but there's something compelling in this for me, and I think it'll be compelling for you. It's about soap dispensers. Hang on. Automatic soap dispensers. How does it work? You take your hand, you put it underneath. We don't want to get sara'at, I guess, so we don't touch it anymore. There's an LED kind of light that's going back and forth, and when it sees my hand, the light is going to go back to the machine, and it's going to put out all of that soap. Right? Right. Trust me. You can look it up later. It's not hard science. Well, there's something that was realized recently, is that if you're a person of color, light is going to be often absorbed into your skin, and it doesn't work. So you have all of these automatic soap dispensers out there that if I put my hand underneath it, I'm going to get soap and I get to clean my hands. But somebody who is a person of color, dark skin, black skin, it might not work. Often it will not work. People are looking at their neighbors and saying, is that true? Is he making this up? You'll Google it after Shabbos. But here's the thing. On one hand, that might be kind of funny. On another hand, this might feel a little strange. But if the text is saying the priest has to look where somebody else hurts, the inventors of this automatic soap dispenser isn't looking at a whole segment of our population. And that's how often people feel, and it's hard for me to kind of understand that. I'm only beginning to understand that I don't know a lot about what it's like to live in America and be a person of color. Now, as a Jew, I don't really consider myself white. Somebody else will say, of course you're white. I don't think we should tell each other how we should identify. I see myself as a Jew. I see myself as a minority. That's a whole different kind of a conversation. But I know that other people who don't know me will just see me as another white man. And there's advantages of living in this world like that. There are. But the text is saying I have to look at somebody where it hurts. And there's a lot of people who feel hurt because they're almost invisible. And they're not really existing out there. And for me, it's changing my mindset. I don't think the soap dispenser is racist, but it is an example of bias. Now, bias doesn't have to be hurtful intentionally. When bias is implicit, it's kind of subtle, but it's going to leave a mark for the people that we have bias against. Now, how do you deal with bias? Now, I recently learned that there are 185 different types of cognitive bias, and implicit bias is just one little subset of one of that 185 group. So we can't really get rid of bias, but we can learn how we're going to deal with it. We have to have a sense of awareness of it, and then we're going to respond to people differently. So whether it's about automatic soap dispensers or any of those other kinds of things, even Fitbit is getting into a big lawsuit because it cannot detect the wellness of a person if they have dark skin. We're not looking at people where they hurt. I want to give you another example. Now, I just came back. I just learned this because I was in Cincinnati for the Reform Movement's Rabbinical Association, their annual conference, the Central Conference of American Rabbis. And I took this whole seminar about implicit bias at the Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati because, just across the river is Kentucky. So a lot of people were moving to Ohio. Okay, fine. Now, at this conference, there was another presentation, a really striking presentation from the task force on the experience of women in the rabbinate, my colleagues, women rabbis. And in this morning presentation, there were all of these monologues. All of these different monologues, women sharing their experiences. And one that also just really stuck out with me was about a woman who was applying to rabbinical school in the 90s. And in this interview, I have a hard time saying this out loud. In the interview, she was asked, "What will you do if you're pregnant on Yom Kippur?" As if that would be a problem. And the interviewer, the rabbi, professor from the Reform Movement's College Institute, said that might be unseemly. Now it's cooking. Okay, you've heard me. So this woman shares her story about how difficult that was, but she continued with the process. She got into rabbinical school. She got different jobs, was in a congregation, and had a difficult time getting pregnant and staying pregnant. Out of 5 different pregnancies, she gave birth twice. And some of these experiences were just so painful, and how others responded to her, and the judgment and the hardship as a rabbi in a congregation. And for that 5th pregnancy, it was a very difficult pregnancy for her, but she carried to term, and she herself in this monologue talked about how big she was and nothing could fit. And in her Yom Kippur sermon, when she was 8 months pregnant, right? Yom Kippur, remember the interview? What will you do? Well, she was 8 months pregnant, and she said she was pretty big at that point. She was reflecting with her whole congregation about the interview, saying how wrong it was. 8 months pregnant, and then she got away from the microphone, went right in front of the bima, and turned sideways. Because remember, he said that being pregnant on Yom Kippur could be unseemly. So the reason why I tell you this is just one little example of how so many of the men in the room were kind of surprised. And the women were like, "Seriously? You're surprised by this?" And we kind of were. Because we would expect it in the 70s. We would expect it earlier. But in the 90s and today, we have such a hard time understanding this. Now, up until this point, there also wasn't a lot of conversations. I was talking about this with Rabbi Ruthie just the other day. We weren't having conversations that were open like this amongst colleagues, friends, women and men about the truths that they experience and how we could be allies. Because part of their training, many women, and maybe some of you have a sense of this, was in order to be professional, I take a deep breath, I kind of clench my teeth, and have a professional response, an answer, instead of shutting something down, until a younger generation comes of age and says, "That's not okay." And their older colleagues who have gone through all of these terrible things about being complimented or receiving suggestions about what they should wear or what their shoes should be, all of these different kinds of experiences in terms of touch, inappropriate touch. There's now an open conversation, and I'm sorry that I'm so surprised by this. I really am. Because part of me, I could say I wasn't looking. Part of it is we weren't having this real conversation. But now we are. Now we are. So folks who are here will notice that I don't extend hugs. I don't. Not everybody wants one. I'm an introvert. It's fine. I can get away with it. I'm happy about it. But let's be real. We have gone through all of these decades patting ourselves on the back, thinking how great we have become, and yet we're not looking where people hurt. The Torah portion says we have to look where people hurt, and we get to respond to them. So tzara'at, I would say, doesn't have to be something on your skin. There's a spiritual aspect of this, and we can see God's spark in each and every human being, no matter who you are or how you identify or how you love or who you love or what you look like or where you were born or what faith you came from or how able or not so able we might be. But to be able to see God's presence in one another means that we're going to look a little bit deeper and see if we're hurting. And if you feel some hurt, then maybe we can talk about that. Maybe we don't have to talk about it and we can just sit quietly about it. We can recognize where it is and we can do something about not making each other hurt so much. We can start with the soap dispensers. It should be an easy fix. Now, I just learned this. So in our restrooms, we still have the automatic self. But I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to figure out. They're new, though, so maybe they fixed it. I don't know. But we have to work on it. We have to work on it. Friends, how do we copy the priest? V'ra'a et ha'kohen et ha'nega. Where do we look and see when somebody hurts? How can you love me if you don't know what hurts me? The most prominent line in the Torah, in the Bible, throughout traditions is love your neighbor as yourself. And we say, oh, isn't that nice? But if you really think about it from a spiritual perspective, it changes everything. If I could really love somebody as myself. So teach me. Those of you who have something to teach me, teach me. Teach your rabbi, because I'm listening. And then we have some work to do. So I'm going to show you one little piece of work, and then we're going to conclude. I'm really delighted that just in the last 6 weeks before this conference, I presented to our Board of Trustees a statement to sign onto from Safety, Respect, and Equity. It's a Jewish coalition to address sexual harassment and gender discrimination in the Jewish community. And this organization, this initiative, is going to provide resources and training to us to help open our eyes and to stop making people, women in particular, feel a sense of hurt. We have to see what's going on with the people who are important to us, all of us in our community, because that's how it works. So, open your eyes. See your neighbor. Put out your hand if you're healthy. Share something about yourself. Tell a truth. Good Shabbos.